Hi everybody, welcome back to another episode of our Dungeon Boss Face-Off series. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to be taking a look at new Igorok versus old Igorok. And the reason I'm doing this is because I kind of wanted to do a quick sort of pseudo hero spotlight on Igorok now that he's had his basic mechanics change. Igorok has been switched from I guess I don't really know what he was. He wasn't really a beast. He was just kind of there, and now he's officially a monster, which makes sense because he doesn't really fit the bill for anything else. He's not a beast. He's not human. He's not really anything. He's not an ogre or can't think of what the other one is. Yeah, but that's besides the point. He is now a monster, and he's had some changes to his stats, changes to his mechanics, and we want to see how does new Igorok compare to old Igorok. So in order to get things started, we're going to take a quick look at his stat page. Starting out with the basic stats that we got. His base attack right now is 1967. Old Igorok had base attack of 2263. If you remember some of the old screens, it said Igorok has like the highest base attack in the game, or amongst the highest. That has been dropped down significantly because he is a little bit more tankish now. So the change here, 2263 down to 1967, he's had roughly a 13% drop in attack. Pretty significant. To balance that out and make him more tanky, his base defense of 2633 is a massive increase. His previous base defense was 1998. This gives him a 30%, basically 33% buff to his defense. That's a pretty significant increase. If you remember way back in the day when I did the Hero Priority series and I had tanks in there, Igorok was very much middle of the road as far as tanks go because he was more of an offense-based tank than a defense-based tank. This here is definitely going to give him much more defense now. As far as this calculation goes, I did not factor in the epic into this one. I was just looking at the base defense. If you do have your Igorok maxed out, that epic defense is obviously going to be great as well because that's another 30%. Next up, skill has a base of 1533. This has not changed since old Igorok, and Igorok is not based on skill, so I wouldn't expect that to change that much anyways, and most people are not really critical about this stat anyways. His health, as far as a tank goes, his old health was very low. It was only 6,300 and some change. His base now is 8989, which was a increase even more so than his defense. His health pool has gone up just over 40% at about a plus 42% increase. That's a pretty sizable increase for any stat, but his max health and his max defense is going to make him much more tankier in the long run. Those other stats here, the crit chance, multiplier, reduction, we don't really care too much about those. But in terms of basic attack, that's the only thing that's really gone down. So in the grand scheme of things, it hasn't gone down much, at least not to a point where it's going to be noticeable. But both the defense and the health will be noticeable. So all in all, as far as basic stats go, I would say Igorok definitely got a major buff rather than a nerf like we saw with Masuda Kira. Looking at his abilities, we have a change to his base loadout of abilities. We no longer have the same names of the skills. Polar Pounding is the only thing that has really stayed the same. His basic attack has stayed the same, but it offered up some new mechanics. And essentially what his base attack does now is it gives a chance to sequentially increase freezing type things as far as the attack goes. If you're just attacking somebody normal, it has a chance to chill them. If they're already chilled, it has a chance to frostbite them. If they're already frostbitten, it has a chance to steal or freeze them. So depending on what sort of team you're running with, this can do quite a bit of extra, I guess, crowd control, if you will. The last little bit that you see on his base attack, plus the chance to deal 2 times damage and splash damage, that is from his epic attack. You'll only see that if you do have his epic. So his basic attack is actually pretty good right now if you're running him with maybe another water person like Ice Bloom or maybe Valken to ultimately freeze some of those guys. Because in addition to this basic attack doing extra damage to those, his passive for the Epic Shatter team will also help out there as well. Polar Pounding, in terms of its base attack, has not changed. It still does 100% of his base attack. So that has not been nerfed. The only nerf that we see with Polar Pounding is the minus 13% that we saw with his attack. So in the grand scheme of things, I don't think most people are really overly concerned about the damage output that Polar Pounding does, but more so the chance that it actually freezes. His next up, instead of Reflecting Taunt, we now have Frostbite Taunt, which gives a 55% buff to defense, which is more in line with a lot of the other tanks we see in terms of buffing them up pretty hardcore. Has a chance to Frostbite attackers. This is going to impact melee attackers, essentially. It's similar to a Frostbite skin, if you will. Again, most people are probably not overly concerned about this taunt. Maybe it would be beneficial if you could kind of micromanage it a little bit in terms of frostbiting in PvE dungeons. Not really an issue. Most people fly through the PvE dungeons pretty easily. And besides, a lot of those enemies don't use that many skills where the frostbite's going to impact them, with the exception of a very rare few. The first one that comes to mind is the Permafrost Ice Cavern, when you can boss frostbite those last two bosses. But this is largely an unimportant skill. It just serves as sort of a PvP defense mechanic for the most part. The last one, instead of Arctic Rush, I believe it was called Arctic Rush, we have Arctic Assault, which does 3 attacks. Now it does 1 to the target and 2 random. A lot of people will try to save this one for when there's a single target left, so you can get 3 shots in on them. The big thing with this one is it's meant to be used as somebody who's already frozen, chilled, or frostbitten. In this case here, I guess it says just chilled or frozen, in which case it's going to do 1.5 damage. Not a ton of extra damage, but it's still something. In addition to this, you're going to get the passive from Epic Shatter Team, where you do extra damage there as well. So you do kind of get a bunch of extra damage. That's not to be trifled with. It does stack up quite a bit nicely. Being that there's 3 attacks, the overall attack has gone down on this one. This one does about 80% of base attack. When you do 3 attacks, you're basically doing 240% of the base attack. So you are doing a fair amount. In terms of a single target attack, it's a really great attack. His epic, nothing has changed with the epic at all. Basically the same thing. It just has Epic Shatter Team and then that other main proc. The loadout has not changed in terms of what it actually buffs. So looking at his change to monster, let's take a quick peek at that there and compare to the old Igorok if we can. Old Igorok didn't have a ton of passives. He had the armored and he had the immune to frozen and such like that, and deal extra damage to frozen people. But new Igorok, he does have the insulated woolies, so in addition to not being able to be frozen, he cannot be chilled or frostbitten either. So that is definitely an upgrade for him. He is still armored. I guess there's nothing really to talk about with armored. Monstrous Presence. This is a new stat for him. Monsters take reduced damage from debuffed characters. I don't have an actual number on that. It's not giving us an actual tooltip percentage. This will be directly linked to his skill. So his skill is already fairly low, so I don't expect it to be, I guess, terribly effective, but it will lower from debuffed. What this means is if somebody has a debuff on them, they will do less damage to them. So basically, if you poison somebody, they'll do less damage to you. Monsters cannot be retaliated against. The retaliation here, this is essentially a proc to deal with the pack tactics from the beasts. Now, I don't know how many people are actually running Igorok teams against the beasts, and actually the full beast teams aren't really a thing anymore as far as the current PvP meta, but essentially this will prevent monsters from being retaliated against. That'd be great for somebody like Koros, who might be kind of squishy, or probably like Hopper if you're still using an attack-based Hopper. But it's nice to know that you're not going to get any of those retaliation hits against them, but this is not a critical skill or stat in my opinion. Unnatural Fear is something that the monsters have. They cannot be feared, and they have a chance to fear beasts on the attack. This is what makes Igorok particularly effective against some of the beast teams, is they have the ability to fear beasts when he does that polar pounding. So a lot of times you'll see Igorok paired with Grognog, and sometimes the 1-2 punch there is very, very helpful. But it's not a high priority for me, because like I said, I don't see a lot of full beast teams anymore, and there aren't any real hard PvE dungeons that are very beast-centric. So again, it's a great little add-on, but it's not a deal breaker in any case. Then lastly, we have the Epic Shatter team. Water ally damage versus frozen, and it heals a little bit. So this is only good for water allies, himself included, but mostly pair him with Grognog, and that's going to be how you use it basically. The last thing I had was my Blessing of the Seeker. So ultimately, where does new Igorok stand compared to old Igorok? Pretty much across the board, we've seen tons of upgrades. When the changes were first released and we found out that he was a monster, it was pretty well received. A lot of people were saying Igorok is very relevant again. It is true that I have seen him on both PvP offenses and defenses since he's been changed, largely because of his synergies with other monsters. Remember, most of the monsters will buff each other. Igorok doesn't really have a direct monster buff. He just has this monstrous presence compared to somebody like, let's find Tremus Femus, for example. But most of the monsters, like I said, will buff each other. They will all have their own little monstrous thing here. So he has Monster Guard 3, increased defense by 25%. If you're brave enough to put Femus on a team with Igorok, that extra defense that he already got, plus this here, Igorok can be pretty tough to take down. In fact, plus he's armored as well. So, I mean, these things are definitely worth noting. These are probably going to be more beneficial for PvE dungeons that you're in it for the long haul. Certainly there's not really any difficulty killing Igoroks these days. He's still very susceptible to people like Viperia if you get her attack off, and Lily being double damage to armored will obviously obliterate him in the long run as well. But something to consider as far as using him. I personally have never really used Igorok that much. I got him very late in the game as far as my main account goes, so I did not really reap the rewards of having him for level 15, level 20, and such like that. So he's been largely forgotten for me. But I will say that his new loadout is much more impressive than it was. And if you're on the fence about summoning him, I would say go ahead and pull the trigger on it. If you already have him and he is 4 or 5 starred, you probably don't need to go too much beyond that until we see something else with the monsters that can rival that of possibly the beasts. I don't think he's a terribly high priority. He's certainly not in the PvP meta right now as far as my opinion goes, but he's good for PvE dungeons that need water-based heroes. So if you're farming Lava Academy, Igorok is very, very much part of that so far. So definitely level him up so that you can auto-run Lava Academy. That's going to be a big one. Otherwise, you can keep him on the bench. He could be a 6th or 7th man, if you will, and kind of pull him in where needed. But for PvP, I guess he's not going to be seeing much more action just because of these changes. Not without some sort of other monster leader that has the same impact that maybe someone like Solaris had. Marrow I kind of thought was going to be that monster leader, but being that Marrow started out as a 1-star hero, we're not seeing that just yet. I personally am going to work Marrow into the equation once I get him up to 5 stars and 6 stars. I think he's got a lot of potential, but he's just too low right now. So, if you have any questions, comments, concerns about the changes to Igorok, feel free to leave them below. Otherwise, that's all I got for now, and stay tuned for the next video, which will deal with a particular event coming up. My event, not an in-game event. So, until next time, we will see you again, and thanks for watching. Thank you so much for watching this video and supporting my channel. If you like this video, please show your continued support by hitting that like button, and be sure to check out both my YouTube channels for new content all the time. And always remember, peace is a lie, there's only passion. We'll see you next time.